Okay, so we will be doing a handful of slides here on perception. So we're going to look at self-perception, we're going to look at social perception, and a couple of other things related around that. So just really quickly, right? Remember what perception is. It's really about becoming aware of something through our senses. So in other words, we can say that perception is really the way we see things, hear things, understand things, or are just really aware of things in our environments, in the situations we're in. Um, so it's really a physiological process which we use to interpret the world around us. And we care about perception in companies and organizations because the way we take in information, interpret it, add our own meaning to it, also impacts then how we make decisions, how we behave, so on and so forth. So our perception influences how we act, how we think, and how we actually make decisions in companies. So we care about it for those reasons. So let's talk a little bit about self-perception. So the way you actually perceive yourself and how you think about yourself. We have here self-effacement bias as well as self-enhancement bias posted on this slide. So these are a couple of the errors that we have when we perceive ourselves. So the self-enhancement bias basically says that we have a tendency to look at ourselves maybe a little bit more positively than other people would. So we view our performance, we view our capabilities as just maybe a little better than everybody else. So this would be the statistic that says that, 80% of us that drive cars, we perceive ourselves to be better than the average, which is obviously statistically not possible. So these are the people that believe that they are just a little bit better than everybody else. So in a company, that might be difficult because if you have somebody like this on your team, somebody you work with, somebody that is your employee, it might be hard for them to understand why they did not get that promotion, why they did not get that cool project, because in their own eyes, they deserve that because they are just a little bit better than everybody else. So that's the self-enhancement bias. So we have to manage that in ourselves and other people if we have this human error. On the other side of the coin is the self-effacement bias. These are the people that just think that they are not as great as everybody else. So we have a tendency to underestimate our performance and our capabilities and put ourselves in a little bit more of a negative light than other people might see us. So these are going to be your buddies and friends that they walk out of an exam and they go like, oh man, I can't believe I just failed that exam, and then they aced it, right? Every time that happens, they think they failed the exam, and every time they aced it, they just don't see their own performance and capabilities the way that we see them, or the way that are true, right? So that's self-perception. We also have another self-perception error that is called false consensus. So this is the false consensus error, which basically says that we have a tendency to see our own unique traits or quirks or weird things we do as pretty common. So we think that all these weirdo things we do, everybody else is probably doing them too. So it's okay if we lie a little bit or steal a little bit because probably everybody else is doing it. Well, truth is, not everybody else is doing it. It's a false consensus error. We just think everybody's doing it, while that is not necessarily correct. So the problem here then becomes because we think that everybody else is doing it, so we feel more free to do it more often than we probably should be doing it. So this can really lead to a culture of kind of dysfunctional, weird behaviors that really shouldn't be happening. And it's just because we think everybody else is doing it. All right, those are our self-perceptions, and we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about social perceptions, right? So the perceptions that we have around other people. So the first one is stereotypes. Then you have the self-fulfilling prophecy. And lastly, selective perception, which we actually have talked a little bit about before when we talked about what perception really is. Okay, so stereotypes is really when we think about a group or category of people, uh, and we think about some traits or characteristics of that group, and we assume that every person, every individual in that group holds those characteristics or traits or whatever they are, which is obviously not true, right? So I'm from Sweden, and there's some stereotypes about Swedes being blonde and tall and blue-eyed, right? They have blue eyes, they are blonde, and they're tall, which is true for some Swedes. Some Swedish people certainly are tall, blonde, and have blue eyes, but it's not true for every single individual in that category of being a Swedish person, right? I'm not. I'm short. I don't have blonde hair. I do not have blue eyes. So the stereotype is then that we assume that these traits and characteristics that we perceive the group to have, we think every person in that group has it. So we just stereotype them. That's what stereotyping is. We do it because it's quick. Our brain can't take in all the information we can. So when we meet somebody new from a new group and we say, they come from group A, we immediately jump to those conclusions about people from group A because it helps the brain process, right? Our brain cannot process all the information we have around us constantly, right? This is why we engage in these errors anyways. Self-fulfilling prophecy basically just means that we have a stereotype in our head, and because we have that stereotype, we will treat you accordingly to our stereotype. So if you are Swedish, I will assume that you're introverted and shy and quiet because that is a stereotype about Swedish people. And I will treat you in a manner that indicates that I believe that you're shy. And because I do that, you will feel shy around me. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I treat you in a way that I have in my head around you, and you respond to it by acting in that way. So in the workplace, if you believe that somebody is a great performer, you will give them freedom, you will give them decision making, you will let them know that you believe in them. They are a high performer, you've seen the results before. They hear and see that you truly believe in them, that you believe in their performance levels, and they will deliver to your expectation. On the other side of the coin, right? If you have somebody that you think is a low performer, you will act accordingly. You will micromanage them. You will give them very detailed instructions. You will tell them what to do, and you will check in constantly. And because you do all those things, they get the sense that you don't trust them, that you don't believe that they can do the work. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. They are not now doing the work because they know that you will check in and tell them what to do. All right, selective perception, right? We just pay attention to stuff that we think are interesting or that we value, and everything else falls to the side. So things in the environment you might be completely ignoring while they are super obvious to other people because of their values and perceptions. So selective perception is just that. We pay selective attention to parts of the environment and we ignore other parts. And this is also why stereotypes and other human errors can persist, because we select evidence in the environment around us. All right, so last slide for this little bit is about first impressions, which is also an error in and of itself. So we think of this typically when we think about interviews. You go to a company, you do an interview, you need to have a great first impression. But think about it. You make first impressions for people to people all the time. You walk into the classroom, you walk into a new team, whatever it is, you are in situations constantly where people have first impressions about you. And the trick here is to make a good first impression because these impressions linger. We know from research that people form opinions and thoughts about you from their first meeting with you. And even then later on, they might find out, oh, she really had a bad day. Her daughter was sick. The daughter had been up all night throwing up. That was why she was so short and direct with you. Even knowing that information, that first impression of her being rude and cold and direct to you will persist. So these first impressions are crucial. They stick with us, they stick in our brains, and it's hard to wipe them out, even when we get evidence to the contrary later on. So just pay attention to how you show up, how you behave, and the kind of impressions you make on people. All right, that's going to wrap it for this little bit on self and social perceptions. Take care.